some of the things our government does today in different ways, this was all the descent group's responsibility. Okay, so with kinship and descent groups, and I promise we're almost through this part. Kinship and descent groups. They determine how social groups are formed, and it is the basis of people in relation to one another. You can determine who's your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle. It tells you what their relation is to you. And so when you do that, you're actually figuring out who you can really rely on. You know, who are your people that you can go to for assistance. Also, different descent groups will tell you who you can and cannot marry. Of course, we all know that there are, marriages between brothers and sisters are incestuous and forbidden between parents and children. So this kind of tells you who is and is not an eligible partner. So if you're part of a clan, that's your family. You can't marry anyone that is the same clan as you, okay? Because they're all considered your family, even though you don't know the direct relation. You're all part of this clan that goes way back, generally, hundreds if not thousands of years. So also with kinship and descent groups, this is how people would incorporate strangers into their group. They didn't have a way to include a stranger in the group, so the way that they did it in a lot of tribes was they would basically bring them in kind of and adopt them. And there was a certain clan just for that. And they also, a lot of religious rituals, as we all today still rely on a lot of our relatives with different rituals that we do, celebrations that we have. That's part of, kinship and descent. Okay, with descent groups, two basic kinds, bilateral and unilateral. Bilateral, mom and dad. You go through both lines. Your kin is bilateral, so it's based on both descent lines. That's how we are here, right? That's not how it necessarily is everywhere. Unilineal descent is when you are only following one line, either your mom or your dad. Your matriarchal, your matrilineal or your patrilineal. So, most of the descent groups today are patrilineal, and the ones that are patrilineal, we hear about the word patriarchy, right? And when you hear about that, what sort of ideas come to your mind? Kind of like men dominating? Do women tend to have a lot of rights? Not as much as we would like them to have, probably. So most of the ones today are patrilineal, but that's more, around the world. In Native tribes, Native American tribes, there are still a lot that are matrilineal. However, with colonization, they kind of changed from matrilineal to include the father. So they're more bilateral today, but it's still a strong system in place. So, both males and females will belong to the descent group of their father. Okay, their relatives are on their father's side. A man, his brothers and sisters, his children, his brother's children will all belong to his patrilineal line. Inheritance in a patrilineal system, going to go from dad to son to son. Females are not going to have inheritance. The man's position as a father is a very important source of male authority in a patrilineal system. And men tend to hold social positions and positions of power. So a lot of times, and we know in a lot of different groups around the world, women are kind of excluded from these positions. So here's how a patrilineal descent group looks. If you look, we've got dad and we've got mom. Okay, mom and dad have kids. This is their kid. This is their kid. This is their kid, and this is their kid. These kids are blue because they belong to dad's family. Now, the kids that are going to continue the lineage are going to be from the sons, because daughters aren't, included in this. So we've got 3 kids here. They've got 2 sons. And so the children from those sons' marriages will be part of the father's patrilineage. Okay, with this, husband basically has control and rights over the children. Women don't usually have a real high status, although it can vary depending on where you're at. And with the native tribes, the women did have a higher status, even in the patrilineal groups, than what we're accustomed to hearing about today when we hear about patrilineal and patriarchal societies. Most prevalent among nomadic foragers and pastoralists because they need a lot of the men's cooperative labor. Also found where there's a lot of warfare, because if you are going to raise warriors, it's pretty smart to raise them all together and have them playing together and have them fighting, playing together, and then when they grow up, they're going to be excellent warriors together, aren't they? They're going to make a fantastic group because they've been raised together. They know the signals. They know the little nuances. They know the sounds. Okay? They know how you think. So it makes sense, you know, a lot of times when you have areas of warfare. With patrilineal groups, you usually have what's called patrilocal residence. The bride moves in with the husband's family. Okay? This can be a little difficult on the female, depending on how well she gets along with his family, because she's moved away from her home, and all of her female relatives are over here, and she's over here. So if she's got a problem with her husband, she's got to hope her husband's relatives are sympathetic and understanding. Because if they're not, she's going to feel a bit more isolated. And there's more of a potential for abuse. Because if you've got a whole, if you've got a whole group of women, and you've got, imagine, your family, you've got your female cousins and your aunties and your grandma and your mom and your sisters and all that, and some guy decides to get ugly with one of the sisters. How are the females going to react to that? Yeah, we're going to have that mob mentality and be like, you said, what? Okay, we will have to burn you at the stake now, right? So in a matrilineal culture, of course, that's something that is not as big of an issue because they have that strong female group that they were all bonded with. Okay, so some of the patrilineal tribes would be Cheyenne, Shawnee, Ojibwa, Algonquin. All of these are different patrilineal groups. Matrilineal. Matrilineal is, as much as it seems like men being dominant in different groups and cultures is a natural thing because they're just naturally more dominant. If you look at the history throughout the world, we've had a lot of matrilineal and matriarchal cultures for thousands of years. So it has not always been, as focused on males. You often found this in where women did farm work. Women in the Cherokee tribe did farm work. Men got to kick back, hunt, fish, gamble, talk, whatever they wanted to do. They had it pretty good. Women were out there doing the farm work. So women, a lot of times what we find is how much a woman contributes can impact how the group functions. And so women were, of course, contributing the majority of the food by doing farm work. Women did farm work, they helped each other with childcare. They were stable and cooperative units, and as you can imagine, a female, unit together, they're really able to help each other with childcare and chores and all kinds of things. So with matrilineal, of course, you have descent through women. And what that does is it stresses communal and permanent bonds among the women and between women and their children, most especially their daughters. And so it's very strong bonds that are developed. And so here you see, we've got, here's our mom and our dad, and they have kids, and all those kids belong to mom's lineage. And these will continue the lineage. These two will. This one, because it's a guy, and it's matrilineal, whoever he marries, it will be their kids, their claim. Okay, because it follows the female line. Okay, so everyone belongs to the descent group of mom. You have a woman, her brothers and sisters, her sister's children, not her brother's children, they go to their mom's line. Her own children, children of her daughters, not her sons. Theirs goes to the mom's line. So, women usually have quite high status in matrilineal society. Inheritance goes from mother to daughter. Sons do not inherit. They rely upon their wife's inheritance of land to be able to, continue in their community. Matrilocal residence rules. Moving in with a female family, all right? So she's not losing all that stability. He's coming in and he's more of the outsider. So, and that can be difficult at times, but that's how they rule. The wife moves in with her family. In Cherokee ways, the wife would actually bring her husband in to the house with her mom and dad so they could kind of keep an eye and make sure he was going to be doing right by her. And then when they did finally move out, they'd get a little house right next door. Okay, so it was very close-knit. The husband does get the sexual and economic rights over a wife, but he does not have rights to the children. Okay? He is responsible for the children that are in his clan. Those would be his sister's children. Okay? So it's very different when it comes to fathers because they aren't expected to be the responsible party for the offspring. Her brothers are, or her uncles. Okay? So the rights and responsibilities of the father fall to the woman's brother rather than her husband. The father is committed to pass on his knowledge, properties, and offices to his sister's sons because it's got to stay in his clan. So men play a role in the upbringing of their sister's children, and their own children are members of their mom's kin group. So a man's loyalty is sometimes split between his biological children, depending on how much interaction and how involved he is, and between his nieces and nephews, who he is responsible for. So it's two very, very different systems. Do I have any questions on matrilineal and patrilineal? We all kind of understand the way the systems work. Good. Okay, so you all heard of patriarchy. Patriarchy, of course, is a social system in which men occupy all these positions of power. They're the ones that are in control. Women are often excluded. Men are dominant in economic, social, political life. Okay, so it goes along with being patrilineal. Usually if you're patrilineal, you have a patriarchal society. That's basically men rule and women don't. What we see today is that men rule and women don't have a lot of rights in a lot of these places. It was less rigid with Native Americans because women were honored in all tribes, whether or not they were matrilineal or patrilineal. Now what's interesting though, we know what patriarchy is. Matriarchy is not a mirror image of patriarchy. There's never been a society that we're aware of where women ruled and men didn't get to have any say. Okay, that doesn't happen. In a matriarchal system, it's equal. Okay, you've got much more equality in the system. Women can have all kinds of social roles, political roles. There's usually a clan, a council of women for the group, for the tribe, or for whatever group of that tribe, and they actually have a whole lot of power. Okay, they are, if there is a final judgment, a final ruling to be made on something because they're having a struggle with getting a consensus from the whole group, generally that's going to be made by some matriarch, a little elder woman who everyone feels has a great deal of wisdom and knowledge, and they want, for her to help. So, matriarchy is not the same as is not the opposite of patriarchy. It is actually quite different because patriarchy is ruled by men. Matriarchy is ruled by more consensus, and if we need a final say, we probably are going to have a little granny that we can, that will be the wise one to guide everyone. Okay, and again, matriarchal societies have existed throughout the world over time. Women have played a big role in tribal nations, in the government of tribal nations, as far back as we know. They were seen as having this innate ability to reason and to be able to give wisdom. So they were very honored and equal in most instances. Characterized as wise because they originated the teachings for the children. Men were a lot of times allowed to speak for the group, but that was at the guidance of the consensus or the female consensus, depending on where we were at. So women in these societies, they held all kinds of positions. Faith healers, for Eastern tribes, they were the originators of the longhouse system of government, where they designated which guy was going to articulate the laws and speak for them. But it was not a system ruled by men. He was speaking for the group and the consensus. So we have a variety of matriarchal tribes. Of course, Cherokee was matriarchal, Choctaw, the Creek, Chickasaw, Seminole, Lakota, Navajo. We've got a lot of them, and this was just a small list that I compiled quite quickly. You'll have to pardon me, I've had a terrible cough, so I'll be drinking a bit. So now we get to the Cherokee Nation. Cherokee Nation is up in Tahlequah. It's in the northeastern section of Oklahoma. If you ever get the chance to go, it's a wonderful place. Some of you saw the video that she was doing about Delaware, and that they have up in Oklahoma in Cherokee Nation a living village. They have set up this entire area, and based on archaeological evidence and historical evidence, they have created a village from the early 1700s before trade was happening with Europeans. So you can actually go through this. They've got the buildings all set up like they were back in the 1700s. They've got the council house. They show you how they did pottery, made blow darts, knapped flint, made canoes, the spiritual ceremony. They do all kinds of stuff. So it's quite a fascinating living museum that they have there. Cherokees, we were hunters and gatherers, fishermen and farmers. Lived in longhouses, and during the summer they had wattle and daub houses. In the summer they lived in the longhouses, but in the winter they had these wattle and daub houses, and they made them in a special way because it was winter and it was cold, so they had to be able to have a fire going all the time inside of it. The Cherokee, we lived in small villages located near rivers. Okay, and this again, to the houses, I probably shouldn't have that in there. Okay, Cherokee government. Okay, we had a council of both men and women, but there was definitely women's councils. Different parts of the councils made different decisions. So there's certain things that the women have more say on. Leaders were elected. There was no passing on the heritage to the position to the next person. It was a matter of the people agreed that you were excellent in this area and you should be a leader. So that's how they did that. And so, of course, women were very able to be leaders. They had their own form of the Constitution. Some of you may not realize this, but the United States Constitution is based on the Iroquois Confederacy and their Constitution. So it's quite interesting to look at how much Native Americans actually influenced the happenings that were going on at the beginning of this country. So, women had a part in government, and they decided if the tribe went to war. Women also, a lot of times, had the ability to determine what happened to the captives after a battle. After a battle, you've got these captives. What are you going to do with them? Are you going to kill them? Are you going to bring them into your tribe somehow? And women, because they lost their husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers, they were the ones that frequently got to determine what happened. They didn't always, but if they chose to, they had that right because of their loss. Okay, Cherokees were powerful and thought of themselves as the real people, as did pretty much all tribes. A lot of tribes, when you hear their names, what their names frequently stand for is the real people, the true people, something to that effect. Villages were run by councils. Leaders were elected. And we had a lot of Cherokee trading going on, you know, that trade routes all over the place. You would be amazed at all the trade routes they are finding now with the sort of technology we have. Yes, sir?
How would they react when the Europeans would want to trade with them, and then they would find out that the women were kind of handling the government?
That the women were what?
Were handling the government.
Oh, that's actually very interesting because...
How would they, the power dynamic go in that general way?
It actually baffled the Europeans of how much power the women had, and it baffled the Indians of where were their women, because they weren't bringing their women to meetings. So both of them were very confused and kind of like, what's wrong with you?
Did it like stop them from trading at all? Or
It did not stop the trading. It did not stop the trading. There were a lot of things that Native people wanted that they didn't have. They didn't have the metal. They were still using the stone tools, the arrowheads, the projectile points, axe heads, still made of stone. So metal was, you know, wonderful. Having a metal pot to cook in, and you know, it lasts for so long. That was just, you know, something that, so there were certain trade goods that they really did want. Okay, Cherokee clans. We talked about clans a few minutes ago. That is how the Cherokee organize themselves into groups, is by clan. You inherit your clan from your mother because it's matrilineal. A clan, remember, they share a particular ancestor, but you can't necessarily trace your lineage to everyone. Up in Cherokee Nation, I know people that still very much follow the clan rule, and will, one of my friends in particular, while she was dating, the first thing that she would ask someone was, what is your clan? Even if she'd never met them before and they have no idea how they're related or whatever, what is your clan? If they have the same clan, they cannot marry. So that is how many people still, you know, maintain those traditional ways. Okay, so there were 7 clans. We'll go over those in just a second. People in a clan, like I said, treated every member of the clan like brothers and sisters, even if they lived in a different village. So you go to a different village, you need a place to stay, you find someone that's in your clan. That's all you got to do. They're going to welcome you in because you're family. Doesn't matter if they know you, you're their clan. Okay, so the clans had specific purposes. The Cherokee had, we have 7 clans now. It was more than that, but through time, somehow we have gotten down to 7. We have the long hair clan, and that's where you get the peace chief. And that is the clan where if you've got a stranger that doesn't belong to your Cherokee tribe, they go into the long hair clan. Okay, automatically. The blue clan, medicine for children. The wolf clan was the war chief. These are the protectors. The wild potato clan, the keepers of the land. They take care of everything. The deer are going to be fast runners and hunters. Paint is also for medicine, but this is also medicine that they use topically on you and actually paint on your body. And then the bird clan is the messengers between earth and heaven, and they took care of birds and were very specific about taking extra special care of certain birds, like the raven, the hawk, you know, eagles. Certain birds are going to be, you know, very honored. Okay, Cherokee men and women. Here's how life kind of went for them before colonization. Women did agriculture, households, cared for children. They were leaders, mentors, and matriarchs. Men, they sat around and made their traps, their blowguns, their fishing weirs, bows and arrows, and so basically a lot of the time for them was actually kind of leisurely. There's a whole joke about the colonizers trying to improve on this, you know, way of life where men were like, all right, let's go fishing, and women are like, let's go get the corn. You know, men were doing pretty good. But there were other balances, of course, because everything is in balance, and that's one of the things that Native tribes believe very strongly in, is balance. In the summer, in the summer, men fished and gambled, and at times they would help their women in the fields. But in the winter, the women got to stay at home in the warm houses while the men got to go out and hunt. So again, there's always balance. Leisure time, they had a lot of different activities, dances, and they had different games. With Cherokee, we have a game called stickball. It's kind of like lacrosse, except the men are the ones that have to use the sticks and throw the ball with the sticks, and they got to try to hit this top, usually there's an animal at the top of a pole, and they got to try and hit that animal with it. Women, however, don't have to use sticks and have no rules. It's a fun game. I saw my daughter actually plow into my husband one day they were playing stickball, and the girls have no rules. Men will come back with their shirts ripped because the girl's trying to get the ball. She doesn't have to use a stick, and she doesn't have any rules. So, it's a little bit, a little bit rigged, but my daughter came literally like a football player, full force, because my husband had the ball. And he went probably 3 feet back with him trying to maintain the ball, but couldn't because she was really like a football player that day. Okay, so lots of leisurely activities, making baskets. They made their own clothing, their own jewelry, of course, all of that. Okay, so Native American women. Men did not dominate nor control women in their tribes, even when you're looking at patrilineal tribes. There was a lot more equality than what we think of today that's out there in the world. Women had some influence, of course, over the political processes. They had quite a say. Let's see, in each point, the 7 Cherokee clans, the women played an important role in the governing. So all of the Cherokee clans were represented at the tribal council by an honored woman. They had a designated woman, and we'll talk about her in just a minute. The beloved woman was a spokeswoman for the honored women, and the role of the beloved woman was the highest status a Cherokee woman could ever get. The role of beloved woman actually meant you overrode the chief. Okay? It doesn't matter what the chief says. You have the right to override him. So, in general councils, and this is a modern day council of Cherokee Nation. This is actually our principal chief right here, Principal Chief Bill John Baker. At general councils, women's opinions were as important as a man's. So women actually in Cherokee culture had a lot more rights than the European women that came over here. And remember, they couldn't even vote. They were men's property. So there were a lot more rights involved. Respect flowed, from this place from women. And she held rights to property, again, inheritance, it's matrilineal, going through the daughter. Her children, if they were her children with someone who was not a Cherokee, would be citizens of the nation. But a man who is a Cherokee citizen, his children would not be, because they go with the mom. And if she's white, then there's no clan left. The clan line dies there, because it goes to the mother's line. So, and again, with colonization, that has kind of changed. There is a relationship with both mom and dad's family now, but a lot of things are still very female focused. So, Cherokee women, see, these are some things they could do. They could choose their own mate. They wanted a divorce. You know what they did? They took the men's stuff, because it's matrilineal, matriarchal. The woman owns everything except what the man brought in. So basically, if she wants a divorce, she takes his stuff, puts it outside the door, and then goes back. And when he comes home, and he goes, oh, what did I do this time? And he has to go back to his clan, where his mama is, because that's his clan. So he goes back home to his mom until he goes somewhere else. Okay, so, and this is before colonization. They were able to do this sort of stuff. So imagine how difficult it was for women to adjust to the new rigid rules that came along with colonization. These women were very educated. Education was vital to the Cherokee people. Though not common, adultery was not considered a great sin. It wasn't, like it is for, people in America. Sex was not as regulated and as strict. Rape and domestic abuse were very rare. A woman would, she could tend to her farming in the morning, and then if she was a warrior woman, get on the horse and ride into battle that evening. Okay, so women were very strong. She could actually walk naked to a stream to purify herself without any harassment. And for the longest time, actually, women only wore, like a bottom part. They didn't really wear anything up here. Again, Europeans coming over were a little displeased at some of these things. They didn't think that was quite appropriate. Sexual encounters are seen as natural, something to be enjoyed, not regulated, not something for people to, get so concerned and make all these rigid rules. And here's where we come into what you were talking about, some of the men and the women. When the king's men first came to enter into negotiations in the 1700s with the Cherokee, they were blown away that these women had so much power. How can this tribe let these women have all this power? And of course the Cherokee were going, where's your women? Are they back there somewhere? We need to go help them, right? Because they automatically assumed that they would bring their council of women. It never dawned on them that you would not include a woman in something. So a very, very different way of life before European colonization over here. So now we get to Nanyahé, who is also known as Nancy Ward. Nanyahé is one of the most well-known figures. I would love to see her in the historical textbooks, that they teach, regular schools. Nanyahé, she's actually, I believe, my 8th great-grandmother. So I, of course, have a strong link to her. But her story is controversial, but it is very powerful. So this is a rendition of her. The man that drew this met her when she was much older in life. And he drew this rendition of her, which is one of the most famous pictures that we have. And this is, of course, where she's buried. And, they call her the princess and the priestess. And I find that interesting because we don't have Cherokee princesses. There are none. So it's quite interesting that this is actually on her, on her tombstone that, she was that. Because there weren't any, but she was the beloved woman. So, she was born approximately 1738, died in 1822, up in Tennessee. Her mother was called Tame Doe, and her father was Five Killer. She had the role of Giyahu, it's hard to pronounce that one, or beloved woman, and that was a real influential role. She's the most well-known beloved woman, and she's the last beloved woman until the 1980s. Okay, so from the early 1800s to the late 1980s, we did not have females playing a role. Or they were playing a role, but they were not in the government. Because again, we had colonization happening, and they weren't too keen on our governmental systems having women in them. So, she was a very brave warrior, and I'll tell you that story in just a second. But she was not only a warrior, she spoke on behalf of her people with U.S. representatives. She wisely counseled her tribe in many different ways. She did believe that, unfortunately, she thought that the settlers were going to take over all their land and it would be the end of the Cherokee tribe. And fortunately, she did not live to 1838, which was when the Trail of Tears began. But she did kind of foresee it. When she was young, she saw these missionaries and everyone coming in, and they were trying to get the Cherokee people to convert. A whole lot of people were still wanting to preserve their traditional customs, and so there was a mixed reaction to the Christians coming in, the missionaries. The message that they brought was the message of Jesus, and that worked very well with the beliefs of native people. Okay, the teachings of Jesus are basically the teachings of native people. So a lot of them were willing to accept it, and a lot of them weren't, but they were kind of forced. They didn't have a lot of choice. Some of you might be aware that, there was a whole, 150 years, 200 years of putting children in mission schools, 2,000 miles away from their parents. They didn't get to see their parents but once a year if they were lucky. And so it was very, very, and they were abused, and it was a very bad situation. So there was a lot of concern with all of them. Some saw these people coming in as a threat, some saw them as a blessing. So you had mixture in the Cherokee tribe of the feelings. So, Nanyehe. When she was in her teens, she married a man named Kingfisher. In 1755, they were fighting the Creeks. Now, the way it would work is they'd go into battle, and the men would have the guns, and they would do the shooting. And the women would actually sit next to them and chew the bullets to kind of mangle them a little bit so that whenever they hit someone, it did more damage. So she's sitting by this tree, and she is mangling these, chewing them on them, and Kingfisher is killed. So he falls, and he dies. Nanyehe, what she did is she picked up his rifle and started with a war cry and led the Cherokee people into a victorious battle with the Creeks at about 18, 19, 20 years old. So she was the youngest woman to ever get this title. But she definitely earned it, with her bravery and her actions. So, Kingfisher dies, and out of all of this, this victory, she earns the honorable title of Beloved Woman, which is the highest title, as we said, you can get. So Nanyehe, she became a great influence. A lot of times, behind the scenes, she was the highest one to which a Cherokee woman could aspire to be, which was Beloved Woman. That was the highest that you could get. So also with that, of course, is a lot of responsibility. You have, you're going to be guiding people. You're helping make decisions. These are, especially at this time, these are enormous responsibilities because they're dealing with the colonizers. They're dealing with, the treaties. They're still making treaties to give away land. This is before, the Trail of Tears and before the land was just, out and out stolen. So she's at a real, stressful time in history. Okay, so privileges for her. She was the leader of the Women's Council. Again, she could override what the chief said. Now remember, it's a matrilineal tribe, so when the chief speaks, he's not speaking just for the men, he's speaking for the whole consensus of the group because they are matriarchal as well. Okay, so she became a voice and had, of course, a vote in General Council, led the Women's Council. The black drink, which was a very special drink to be prepared for the warriors, she was allowed to prepare and to give that as well, which is a tremendous honor because that's something that would have been done by a medicine man or a holy man. The right to save a prisoner that's already condemned to execution. Again, she can come in and go, well, nope, stop it, change my mind, we're not doing that. And they have to because she is so honored and respected and her knowledge is so valued. Okay, so she was an ambassador, a peace negotiator. She truly was an amazing woman, and she wanted to work with the colonizers. And this is where things get a little bit more tricky, was working with the colonizers and trying to keep things peaceful. Okay, so basically, we don't know if Dragon Canoe is her cousin or her brother. One of the confusing things for people when they came in to try to understand family units was that most tribes had the same word for brother and cousin, and male cousin. Okay, so it was real hard to tell who was who because of the terminology wasn't the same classification system as the Europeans had. Okay, so we're not sure at this point whether or not he was brother or cousin. Interesting. The way he got his name was there was a group of men going to go out in their canoes, and they were going to go do their fishing and stuff, and he was little, and he wanted to go, and they said, no, you need to go back, go back to the village, go, back, we're doing this. And what he did as a little one was he started dragging a canoe as hard as he could to get there, because he wanted to go out so badly with the older men in the tribe. And so that's actually how he got his name, because names with Native Americans can change depending on where you're at in your life. And that's how he got his name, Dragon Canoe. So he was very anti-colonization at this point. He was very much there's actually an entire play done on it. They've made a movie out of her story. And he was tired of the settlers, and he kept saying, they're going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming. They're not going to stop. We need to take care of this problem now. We need to kill them. And she was like, wow, I don't know if that's a good idea, okay, because we kill them. They're going to kill more of our people. They're going to come in. It's going to be ugly. We've lost enough men. We've lost our sons, our brothers, our husbands. We can't do this. And so there's a whole argument that they have, and it's actually documented because there was a British general there during this whole thing who was supposed to be, a friend of the Indians. But again, when you are working for another group, even though you might be trying to be their friend, your ultimate goal is in loyalty is over here. Okay, so she didn't want any more deaths. So what happened is she warned a couple of these settlements about the attack that was going to happen. She did this a couple of times. And so the settlers were prepared, and it didn't make Dragon Canoe and his people happy. So the settlers really started liking her, but there was a lot of friction going on now in the tribe as far as what to do. But again, she's a beloved woman. Okay, so they, defer to her authority due to the respect of her knowledge. So this is actually a very controversial part because, it kind of goes back to, should the Cherokee have just fought with all their might, or should they have stepped back and not done as much fighting, but by doing so, preserving possibly themselves? Which would have been better, which way would have been better is the question. And that's where the controversy comes in. Would it have been better for the Cherokee just to really fight to the death, or to have what has happened now? So, again, very controversial in a couple of different ways. Let's see. Oh, I do have time for this. Let me pull this up real quick. This is a person who is speaking for Nanyahe. Okay. So it's important just to kind of listen to her words, because she's kind of giving insight into what it was like.
I'm sitting here outside the fort here at Martin Station. I've been working in the garden all day long, and I'm tired and just reflecting on the people a little bit right now. There's so much going on. Our people are really divided. The Onegas, the white folks, they're divided right now too, because there's big talk of war. Those they call the British across the big ocean, they're fighting with the long knives, the ones here in Virginia. And it's making our people fight too. We're fighting We're fighting brother against brother and father against son because our culture is changing. The long knives, the white men have come in and they brought the things that we like. I can trade one deer skin for a new pair of boots. Because my moccasins are wet. Boots feel good on my feet. But is it worth it for me to trade one deer hide for a pair of boots? Or a knife? Maybe so, but the we are disappearing. And our culture is disappearing. The ways are changing. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between the long knives and solid E. The clothing is starting to change. We're losing our ways. I try to teach my children to hold on to the old ways that we quickly see it go. My uncle at Akulakula, he was in favor of the treaty. I don't know why. Maybe he was just tired of the fight and tired of people suffering. Maybe he was used to the new ways. But my cousin, Dragon Canoe, he fought, he continued to fight. He was so against signing the treaty that he's even broken away from the Solidi. He's formed a new band called the Chickamaugas. We have this war going on, but the Cherokees have their own war going on. And we're trying to fight hard to keep the old ways, but still find ways to survive. And it's harder for us. It's harder for us right now because we rely on the ways of the Yonegas. We need their knives. We need their hoes. It makes our life easier. People are forgetting about the old ways and how to survive. So we have to find a way. People are blending. Our cultures are colliding. Our children are of mixed blood right now. But we maintain our ways. And it's important to us to try to get along, or the people won't survive.
Okay, so she's just kind of speaking as if she was Nanyehe. The challenges that they're facing, the division in the tribe. And so you can kind of see just from that how difficult it was in that era. You know, people that did want these things, but to have these goods, you've got to trade with people who aren't necessarily keeping their word in some ways. You know, so you know you're in a difficult situation at that point. Okay, so Nanyehe, like we said, she could override and you know say what she said pretty much went. So there was a woman named Ms. Bean who was captured at one of the battles, and Ms. Bean was going to be put to death. I believe she may have actually been on being tied to the stake when Nanyehe came up and went, no, I want her to come with me. Okay, so untie her they did because, you know, she had a different idea, and of course she's a very wise woman. So we cannot forget how incredibly wise she was. So she takes Ms. Bean, she takes her away from being executed. I believe Ms. Bean actually wrote excerpts about her time with Nanyehe or Nancy Ward, and it was a positive experience because Nanyehe took her in as a friend. Come be my friend, live with me. Show me some of these things that you know how to do. So she took Miss Bean in, she nursed her back to health, and she started asking about some different skills that would have really significant consequences in the future, significant results. And that was weaving clothing and owning dairy cattle. Because at this point, they're still making their clothing out of buckskin. And if you go to Oklahoma, if you ever get the chance to go up to Cherokee Nation and you go to Living Village, They're all going to be in buckskin. Okay. So Ms. Bean, she wove her own cloth. This Cherokee, like I said, still wearing buckskin, still wearing animal hides. So she's taught Nanya how to loom, how to spin thread, and how to weave cloth. It's actually a very interesting process to watch people. If you've never seen it, it's quite interesting because they take this thing of this big thing, you know, batch of like cotton, and it's got all kinds of sticks in it and stuff, and you start just, you know, doing it on this wheel and making it thin, and it's a very fascinating process actually. Okay, so she teaches Nanya how to do this, and what this does is now the Cherokees are not as dependent on traders for certain items. But it also kind of made it to where women were expected to now, instead of doing the farming, stay at home and do the sewing of clothes and all the housework and the kids. And now the men who were hunters are now farmers. Now, this actually was very devastating for the men because their whole world had been around hunting, fishing, things of that nature. And now they're being told, largely by this new governmental system that's coming in, they're saying, no, you only need to be allowed to be over on this much property, and yeah, you can't go over there and hunt anymore because we just gave that to, you know, Jim Bob over here. So you can't go over there and hunt, and so what you need to do is have cows and domestic animals. So they pretty much changed the whole lifestyle of the men and the women. Which, you know, was quite significant because now women are supposed to be housewives, men are supposed to be the farmers and the ranchers. Mrs. Bean taught Nanya about raising cattle. Okay, this was instrumental because Nanya learned about dairy foods, and that can be a significant part of your diet, especially if something happens with your fields. You know, there are a lot of cultures that live primarily on dairy food. So she got a cow and learned how to make different things out of it. But again, there's pros and cons to things. There's balance. Cherokee started getting really large herds and large farms, which required a lot of manual labor. Well, we know that people really didn't want to do the manual labor. And Nanya actually was the first Cherokee woman that had a slave. Not proud to say that, but it is the truth. She, you know, the slave would have helped her with the land. Along those lines, though, we have to also keep in mind that part of what was going on with the Cherokee people and the reason that we have survived as long as we have is because early on, Cherokee people started assimilating. They figured out pretty quickly that if you did things the way the white man wanted you to do it, you got benefits. And if you didn't, life could be really bad. So Cherokee were adopting a lot of European ways of life to fit in and to be able to continue their existence. Because as we know, the people who fought to the end ended up with a lot of devastation and starvation and tribes, you know, that were just, you know, decimated by the whole situation. So I'm not saying that that is a valid reason for her to do that, but that is some of the thinking that was going on. And what is real important to understand is how other people think. Not that you have to agree, but understand other people's logic, and it will help you understand their life. So she was actually the first slave owner of the Cherokee people. Now, she signed the first treaty, the Treaty of Hopewell, with this newly formed United States. But by 1800, it was becoming pretty clear that Americans were going to keep taking the land, and that wasn't going to change. Now, at this point, she's being called Nancy. She actually gets the name Nancy Ward, and I don't have this in there, but she, at some point, marries, later in her life, a man, I believe, named George Ward. Okay, so, now she's being called Nancy because, remember all these colonists? They like her. she has a place in American history as well as Native American history because she saved the lives of, there's no telling how many settlements, how many colonists in those settlements. Okay, so she's being called Nancy. In 1808, the Women's Council, with Ward as its head, at this point, she says, do not sell any more land. They're not going to stop. Okay, so remember her and Dragon Canoe had this whole thing, and now she's kind of going, you know, I think we do have to stop trying to make them happy because they keep taking. So again, in 1817, she took her seat at the council, and she told the young people to refuse any requests for land, and she told them to take up arms against the Americans if necessary to keep their land. So, okay, then later in life, she returns to her homeland. Her son cares for her. When she dies, he says that there is a white light that left her body. It's believed that the light would have entered the most sacred mound in the mother town, which is the Chota Mounds. Ward was spared the sight of her people, their exile into Indian Territory in 1838. But because her spirit was present still at Chota, she was there, that's where her spirit was, they knew that she had preserved that connection to their eastern home. Okay, because we know that they, you know, had to leave a great deal of land due to the Trail of Tears. And interestingly enough, if you don't know, the Trail of Tears was totally illegal. The Cherokee Nation had a lawsuit against the state of Georgia, and the Justice John Marshall on the Supreme Court basically said, no, you can't do this. We've made treaties, okay? You cannot make them leave their land. And so he said no. And Andrew Jackson's response to that was, Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let's see him enforce it. Because who is in charge of the military? Andrew Jackson. So it was totally illegal, that whole land grab, 100% illegal according to the Supreme Court. So the Cherokee really were trying to do things through, you know, the system, the American system that had come into play. Ward is still a very powerful symbol for Cherokee people, for Cherokee women. Feminist scholars write about her. She's an inspiration, and she is quite revered. Even though there are these controversial elements, she's still very revered and honored for the fact that she was so wise and such a strong warrior and fought for her people as hard as she did. So that is the story of Nanyaheg, the last beloved woman of the tribe, and she died in the early 1800s. So then we have this whole period, of course, with all kinds of stuff going on, tons of history with Indian country. And in the 1970s, they reorganized tribes. There were different programs to totally do away with tribes. Okay, they would have, they would just come up with programs one after another that was trying to eliminate tribes. If they could eliminate tribes and disperse them to where there were no more real Indians, then they wouldn't have to uphold any of the treaties. And the treaties are why the Indians get money for health care and education. And the education money benefits everyone in the whole area, not just the Cherokee or whatever tribe is there. So, yes.
That's just K through 12 education, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's K through 12. Any ideas that anyone has about Cherokee get a free education? Because there's a lot of myths about Indian people. Indians, I have student loans like you wouldn't believe. Okay. They don't pay taxes. Oh, yes, they do. Okay. There are not free handouts to natives. As a matter of fact, the U.S. government doesn't want to give any money to Native Americans. They cut it as often as they can. Okay, so yeah, and it's K through 12. So you know, college is a matter of you got to get scholarships or pay for it yourself. Although the Cherokee Nation has wonderful programs A lot of people think that Indians get money every month, right? You get a check. Couple of tribes do that. There's a tribe that came into big oil money on their land. Everybody gets a check every month. Most tribes do not do that. Most tribes are way too poor to do something like that. Cherokee Nation takes all of its money and it says, if you need help, we will help you. We have programs to help you get on your feet and get ahead in this world and get an education or get some training. So they have programs to help you if you need help. And it's not like government programs where you got to wait 2 and 3 weeks. It's like, you know, you call the Cherokee Nation headquarters and go, I'm being evicted today. And they go, okay, let's figure this out. Okay? So they definitely try to take care of their people. The governmental system is reorganized in the 70s to where because before then, the United States government was picking the chiefs of the tribes. Yeah, that worked well for us. Okay, so in the 70s, reorganization, restructuring, people get to now choose the chief. Okay, woman man killer in the 1980s. One of the things she said is, I want to be remembered as the person who helped us restore faith in ourselves. At this point, Cherokees have been very divided. Civil War divided them. You know, what we just saw with the speaking about Nanyehe, they were very divided. Brother against brother in a lot of the battles. Woman Mankiller was the first woman elected principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, and she is omitted in the history books. They don't talk about her. What a powerful woman. First woman elected. Okay, so, and she basically ranks with people like Harriet Tubman and Eleanor Roosevelt. She was truly a strong, amazing woman, an activist, a warrior woman. So, she was born in Tahlequah. Like I said, if you ever get the chance to go to Tahlequah, it's a lot of fun. 1945. She was the 6th of 11 children. Charlie Mankiller was her father. Irene Sitton was her mother, and her mother was Dutch-Irish. So, she was, of course, a descendant of Cherokee Indians, and she, you know, of course, you know, is a descendant of the people that had to walk the Trail of Tears. And interestingly enough, a lot of us can actually trace who was on the Trail of Tears because of all the documents that the government was keeping on Indian people at the time. They were keeping, you know, quite a few documents on. Okay, so 4 decades after she's born, she's the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. Okay, amazing woman, especially when you hear a little bit of her story. Okay, so she's born in Tahlequah. The government is, like I said, lots of programs to try and basically scatter Indians, because if you can scatter them, you do away with their traditional ways. You have less people over here practicing the ways. Hopefully, eventually, they will just kind of not be Indians anymore. Okay, so the government has a program in the 50s, I believe it was. And basically they said, hey, all you Indians, you move to these certain towns, these cities, and we're going to help you. We're going to give you a place to live. We're going to help you with money. You're going to have food. Life is going to be good. And there's a lot of poverty in Oklahoma at this point, okay? So, of course, you know, people went, we have the chance to get a job and feed our kids. And so rather than doing things in Oklahoma to help the Indian people, they said, all right, we'll do these programs. So that's why there are so many Indians now in California. There's a whole lot in Texas. A whole lot of people relocated for this promise of a better life. Do you think the government was being honest? No, they weren't being honest. No, people got out there and they found that they were living in the slums and living in poverty, and it was a pretty rough life. Okay, so she's living out there in California because her family has left, you know, with, you know, the government program. She didn't want to leave, but she had to. But in San Francisco, she became involved with an Indian center. So while she's there, I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard of the Alcatraz takeover, but it's a very fascinating story. Alcatraz was a Native American sacred island, okay? And now it has Alcatraz on it. What was supposed to be returned back to the natives if they ever stopped using it for a prison. It hasn't been. So in the 70s, what happened was a group of people went to reclaim Alcatraz and to make a statement, because at this point the government's trying to do a lot of things that are a really bad idea for Native American people. Okay, they have all kinds of programs that they're trying to get pushed into legislation. And so the American Indian Movement, which was an organization that formed around that time, came over, and along with a lot of other natives, they took over Alcatraz as a statement. You know, and they said, we're not taking this anymore. You can't keep doing this to us. Ended up getting way out of control, because then, you know, all kinds of people came for the cause, and it got too wild and rambunctious, and the Indians ended up leaving because it just got too crazy. But she was actually there. She was there for that, and that really got her involved. She went, wow, my people have a lot of needs, and I might be able to help them. Okay, so she started really seeing the issues that Native Americans were facing, the issues of the mission schools and the impact of the mission schools. Imagine you get to see your parents once a year. You're living in a culture completely different with people who look totally different from you. Where do you fit? You don't know your traditions. You can't speak your language, because if you speak your language, they're going to beat you for it, because they did not allow you to speak the language. Okay, so imagine the kind of life that just that one aspect of Native American life, how much that has impacted people for generations, because they're learning their parenting skills from very mean, cruel people often. Okay, the people taking care of them at schools, they weren't the nicest people a lot of times. So she's seeing a lot of these things going on. She's seeing that the government is trying to do away with Native American tribes, because the government can do that. As much as we're sovereign tribes, at any point the government can come in and go, yeah, we're going to detribalize everybody. Okay, they're not supposed to, but they've done it before. Okay, so she sees all these different problems going on, all the poverty. If you're not familiar with Native American reservations, full of poverty. Cherokee Nation was full of poverty at this point. A lot of people didn't have electricity and running water. And in the 80s, when she became chief. Okay, so she got real involved, and she said, when Alcatraz occurred, I became aware of what needed to be done to let the rest of the world know that Indians have rights too. Because Indians were not treated with any respect and with any rights, and between a lot of people and the government. As a matter of fact, if you go to areas like South Dakota, the racism toward Indians is unbelievable. You'll hear people talk about those lazy dogs. Still very, very strong in certain areas. Okay, so in San Francisco, she earns her bachelor's degree in social sciences. Then she takes some graduate courses. And she, at this point, has gotten married and had 2 kids. And her husband said, wow, I really would rather you be more of a homemaker than out doing all this activist stuff. And she went, would you now? Okay, see ya. And they got a divorce. She went back to Oklahoma and became, a very big activist. Now, here's where it gets really, this shows how strong a person can be. 1979, there was an automobile accident that she was in where her best friend was killed. Took her a long time to recover from that. And of course, she reflected on the purpose of her life. I have known someone who has been in an automobile accident where their best friend was killed. And there's a lot of, why them and not me? Why did I live? Okay, there's a lot of that tends to go on. So she's doing a lot of reflecting and looking at the purpose of her life, because a lot of times when you're faced with death, kind of makes you reevaluate what your priorities are. So she embraced the Cherokee vision of being of good mind. For Mankiller, this meant positive thinking about what happens in your life, taking whatever comes your way and handling it the best you can, and then helping others. So she was a very caring and compassionate person, as well as a strong warrior woman. The good mind approach, more than ever after recovering from her accident, because then it gets even worse. After her accident, she's diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease that made it difficult to speak, hold a pencil, and even brush her hair. This is all before she's chief. And so she said, I thought a lot about what I really wanted to do with my life during that time. The reality of how precious life is enabled me to begin projects that I wouldn't have otherwise tackled. So it's amazing the strength that can come from adversity. And that's probably something you should all keep in mind. We all go through adversity, but you can find strength from it. Okay, so she found a project. She went back to Bell, Oklahoma, and that's a small area in Cherokee Nation that did not have running water. Okay, so using money from grants that she managed to get, she organized a whole community project where they all came out and constructed an 18-mile-long water system and repaired all the dangerous housing. How phenomenal is that? We take water for granted. We do. We leave it running when we're brushing our teeth, when we do our dishes, all kinds of things. Water is, very precious. And they didn't have clean water. And this is in the 1980s. Okay, so that's not that long ago. Okay, so the efforts, basically she got national recognition in Ms. Magazine in 1987 for this. Okay, so then she runs for deputy chief. Okay, so you've got principal chief and deputy chief. Okay, so she runs for deputy chief and she gets that position. It's not like in American politics where you have two running together, vice president and vice president. It's principal chief running over here, deputy chief running over here, other person running over here. Okay, so it's independent in that way. So in 1985. She was made the tribe's principal chief because the principal chief, for some reason, left the office. So, first beloved woman since Nanyehe. She is now the chief of the Cherokee Nation. She did 2 full terms. Now, mind you, 83 she won. That was a partial term. Then she did 2 full terms. And even though there was opposition, she kept winning. In 1987, when she ran, all kinds of bad things were happening. Some people didn't want her doing it. Her car's vandalized, her safety's threatened, and she's still like, no, I am a strong Cherokee woman. You will not stop me. And so she knew that women had always played a vital role in our social and economic life, political life. Women's councils, she knew, were very common. She knew how important women had been in matriarchal and matrilineal systems, especially the Cherokee tribe. So she describes this delicate balance that Cherokees believe that exists in the world between men and women. You've got to have both. Can't be just one or the other, or there's not balance. So, and she argued that it was the European conquest that disrupted that balance between men and women. And rightfully so to argue that, because it did completely disrupt the ways of life and the balance that had existed for thousands of years. For Mankiller, having a female chief was just a small step toward restoring the proper balance between the sexes in the world of the Cherokee people. So she was, and now we have got all kinds of females on the Cherokee Council, all kinds of them. We have not had another female principal chief yet, but I know it's going to happen. Okay, so woman Mankiller, very popular leader, focused on improving the Cherokee government system, the healthcare system, education, job training, bringing water to people, and also bringing electricity to some of the people in the mountains over in Cherokee Nation that didn't even have electricity at the time. But then she had, some very bad health, and she decided not to seek re-election. Sadly, she died in 2010 of pancreatic cancer. Anytime an elder dies in a Native community, everybody mourns because the loss of knowledge is just so great. And it's very sad to see that much knowledge leave. A lot of tribes are still trying very much to maintain their traditional ways, but it is not an easy thing to walk into two worlds and maintain those traditions. People on the reservations, A lot of people will say, why don't they just leave the reservations and go get a job? If they do that, they leave their whole world behind. They leave their traditions, their family, their friends, they leave the whole world behind. So to make that an expectation is not really fair, you know. It would probably be better to invest in the tribes, invest in businesses on the reservations, things like that. Which you can't get business loans on a reservation, because if you build a building, they can't come and, like, you know, foreclose on it because you're on a reservation. So it gets really tricky. So, you know, she was very much an activist for the Cherokee people and for their ways of life and for their traditions. So upon her crossing over, President Barack Obama issued a statement about this legendary chief. And he said, as the Cherokee Nation's first female chief, she transformed the nation-to-nation relationship between the Cherokee Nation and the federal government, and served as an inspiration to women in Indian country and across America. Her legacy will continue to encourage and motivate all who carry on her work. And she is someone that we look to for tremendous inspiration and motivation. Interesting, I don't know if y'all knew that there was a whole, you know, did y'all hear about the whole $20 bill thing a couple of years ago? She was one of the people who was being voted on whether or not to be on the $20 bill. That is, it kind of shows you the importance that she has actually held, you know, in Cherokee culture. And the fact that she is recognized by the government, by the American government. They're recognizing her. So that, because have they recognized any Native Americans other than her? I don't think they have. So yeah, pretty special woman. Okay, so she says, prior to my election, young Cherokee girls would never have thought that they might grow up to become chief. And now they can. Now they know there is a way. And so I like I like this at the end, and I think this is so powerful because this is one of her sayings, and this is something that everyone should grab hold of. The secret of our success is that we never give up. As long as you never give up, you will be successful. So I hope you have kind of enjoyed learning about Nanya and Woman Man Killer. I hope they are two people that now will stay in your mind, because they are just amazing women from the Cherokee tribe. Any questions? Thoughts? Yes?
So how do you think are the reasons why the U.S. government have to be so cruel to the Native Americans?
Because they wanted the land, and it was easier. Well, first of all, when they saw the natives, they were very different, and they had very different lives. And then they wanted the land, and they didn't really want the Indians to stay Indians, because they saw them as savages. They actually tried to scientifically prove that they were savages by doing what's called anthropometry, which is measuring, like, your head, your skull. They were trying to scientifically prove that Native Americans and the enslaved black people were scientifically, no doubt, biologically inferior. That's what they were trying to prove. Because remember, if they're inferior, then the Europeans need to come over and teach them how to be good people. Okay, so there was a whole eradication effort to eradicate. In the beginning, it was actually a genocidal effort. They actually had signs up that would say $5 per scalp. So the government imposed, you know, this sort of idea of, if you kill one and bring a scalp in, we'll pay you for it. That is systematic genocide. None of that will be revealed in your history books. Okay. Ethnocide is the doing away with a culture. Systematically committed ethnocide against all Indian people. One of the generals, his famous saying was, "Kill the Indian, save the white man." And that's what they were trying to do. Yes.
In the 1970s, our U.S. government, under the direction of former President Bush, the father Bush, led experiments on Native women, including the sterilization of over 17,000 Native women without consent.
They went in for something like an appendectomy. They came out with a hysterectomy. It is well documented that our government did that. In the 80s, right? I think it was
70s.
70s? Yeah. Was not
And
that long ago.
To play off some of the stuff you said, currently in 2019, only 40% of the Navajo Nation, which is I think the second or third largest reservation in the U.S., has running water.
Yeah, on the reservations it is bleak. I mean, there is nothing. You've got shacks and you've got old trailers, and I believe FEMA donated a whole bunch of trailers that had asbestos problems to the tribes.
Isn't there a way for the tribes, are they considered U.S. citizens?
Mm-hmm.
How
As
does the
a-
government treat citizens that way and not get told otherwise? Like, how is that okay?
It's not. If I gave you the list of things that the government has done to Native people, you would be horrified, because it is an enormous list of one horrendous action after another. And they don't teach you about any of this.
With the Native.
Can they sue the government?
No. That's not gonna be allowed.
Yeah, I mean,
The government's not gonna, yeah, that would,
So stupid.
Native
Probably not.
Americans are U.S. citizens, so they have the rights
Mhm.
that are stated in the Bills of Rights, in the amendments,
right.
so they can use that
To an extent. For instance, if you live on a reservation and someone from off the reservation comes and physically assaults you and then leaves, they can't go get that person and bring them back to the reservation and try them in those courts.
Oh.
No, can't happen. Even if they come and murder someone, they're not gonna get tried in the tribal courts. If they get tried at all, it will be in their court system. Things like that go on all the time. Right now, there was a thing with this last election. Which tribe was it? Do you remember?
With which part?
The one,
Oh,
all the voting.
That was the Sioux, the Lakota,
Was it
and
Lakota?
all of them up
They
in.
had, when you're on a reservation, you don't have a road address, you have a P.O. box. One of the states passed a law that said you had to have a residential address to be able to vote.
And they passed that in, I think, September or October,
Right
before the election.
the election. So all these people couldn't vote. All these Native American people.
How convenient.
Isn't that? Isn't that? So, there are a lot of injustices that are currently going on. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with Standing Rock from 2 years ago. That was treaty land. The government had no right to take that land, and not only did they take that land, they came in, and those of you that aren't familiar with it, the natives were trying to hold their ground and say, you cannot put a pipeline through here, our water is right there, okay? So, thousands of people came, okay? First time in history, and I cannot believe media didn't cover it, first time in history that Native American tribes, rival tribes, enemy tribes, all came together at Standing Rock to fight the government and big oil, okay? So what happened is it turned into basically the civil rights movement, where the people were peacefully protesting, and they were, they had the concussion grenades, they had the rubber bullets, one girl lost her arm, there was an incident where they unleashed dogs on some people, one girl lost her eye. These two girls cannot recover any damages for it. They've already tried. And then the top of it was in a 20-degree weather at night. The people are out there still, they're protesting, but they're not being violent. They get out a water cannon from like the fire department. It is 20-degree weather, and they are spraying the people.
So, did it succeed in building a pipeline over there?
Oh, yes.
And it has leaked
Yes.
Over 6 times so far.
Yeah, and it has had, within the first month, it had a nice big leak that their systems didn't catch. A farmer, about 60 miles above where Standing Rock is, a farmer was walking his property and went, whoa, what's that? Huge leak had been going on and none of their equipment detected it. And the whole thing was the people were trying to protect the water, okay, because this is the water source. Who's going to care if Native Americans don't have water? They don't care right now that on a lot of reservations they don't have water and electricity. You know, if you put the pipeline in and something goes wrong, who's going to care? And that was their thing. You can't put this in near our water source. And it was treaty land. And unfortunately, Obama did little to stop the situation, which he had actually been very friendly with the Indians in so many ways and had done some really wonderful things like no other president had done before. So we were all shocked when he was staying silent and he wasn't intervening. But he did finally intervene, and he put some injunction in because they had not done an environmental protection survey. They had not done they bypassed tons of rules. And Obama finally came in and went, okay, we got to have the Texas Corps of Engineers come in. We got to have this and this and this done. Okay, you've got to stop until this is done, and we have that environmental impact evaluation. And that was at the very end of his presidency. Well, Trump is, you know, very supportive of oil companies. So one of the first things he did, and seriously, one of the first things he signed was a document that said, yes, put the pipeline in. And it was treaty land. That was the thing that baffled me. It was treaty land. It was land that the government had said belonged to the Indians, and then later said, we kind of want it back, but there was never an agreement to give it back. So it was still Indian land, and they still went through it. So the government still does things on a regular basis when it comes to tribes. Tribes are just tossed by the side by our government, still. So that's one of the reasons I like to educate people about it, you know, because Indians are still around. They're not always wearing headdresses or anything, but we're still here. Some of us don't look it, okay? I get that, okay? But, you know, it still is my heritage, is my heart. And there's so many people that are suffering. With the shutdown, that government shutdown, Native people were hit the hardest. They were hit the hardest because a lot of them do rely on government help because they live on reservations where there is one store. It is the gas station, it is the fast food place, and it is your convenience store. And that is the only spot on the Pine Ridge Reservation for you to go to. Nowhere else. You want to work? Well, the closest city is about an hour away. So there's a lot of things that need to be done to help Native people because people have this thinking that they are just lazy. No, they have been in a systematic, it's been a systematic oppression of them, of Native people, all of us, for so many years. So I'm not sure how we did all that, but we'll get back to these two beautiful women who are remarkable. And, you know, if you get the chance, look up their stories. Like I said, Woman Man Killer, they have a new movie out with her. Nanyehe, I went and saw a play up in Tahlequah. It was the most incredible play, and it was all about her in Dragon Canoe. And there's actually a movie out about her too. So if you're interested, delve more into it, you know. And so I guess, do I have any more questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. And just to let you know, if you want to pick up a few flyers and give them to your friends, I'm really trying to get anthropology started at this campus. I would like to be able to have anthropology classes here. So if you want to take some flyers and give them out to people, we are offering a summer school anthropology class on this campus. So hopefully, if it makes, we can start, you know, getting people interested and getting anthropology over here. Because if you like learning about cultures and people, you'll love anthropology.
Very cool stuff. Some of the things you guys heard today is stuff that we've talked about in class, or that we've gotten to, like the Iroquois Confederacy. A lot of the stuff contrary to what I even thought as a historian, happens in the 1302 history class after 1877. When I first started studying Native Americans, I thought that 1301 was it. And I was like, I'm not even gonna do a 1302 with a Native focus. Until I learned that that's when all the reservation stuff happened, and we'll do discussions, if y'all take my 1302, discussions on myths and stereotypes of Natives, and the mascots, boarding schools.
Oh, yeah.
We just did Indian Removal Act in our class.
Oh, wonderful.
Sunday, I think, was when that was due.
Have you heard of Andrew Jackson?
Oh, yes, the horrible man.
Yes.
But even to 2019, we're having issues. Ms. Schellenberg mentioned the stuff with Standing Rock and it being treaty land. We're having the same problem with the border and the
Oh, yeah.
border wall, because they have disregarded all of these American laws to put the border wall through native land. Again.
Bypassed all these laws.
And part of the land is a native cemetery, which Americans tend to look at, or at least the American government tends to look at sacred sites of natives as, they just choose wherever they want to have their sacred sites. Well, no, these are their ancestors that are buried there, and the U.S. government wants to plow through them and build a wall.
Yeah, that is actually one of the fights going on at the, if any of you are interested, I am also part of the Society of Native Nations. And we are fighting for Native rights, and especially for Mother Earth and the water. And we are involved in this with the Carrizo tribe, because the Carrizo tribe has a cemetery there that is going to be bulldozed, and they are fighting very hard to keep them from bulldozing that. There is a tribe, I can't think of how to say their name, but their reservation actually is on both sides, okay? It surrounds, it's in Mexico and it's in Texas. They don't want a wall. Their relatives are right over there, okay? You know, it's big. It's a big, there's so many things. Native Americans are constantly doing protests, constantly doing peaceful protests, because there are so many issues that are happening with each of the different tribes. It's pretty unbelievable when you really start looking into the things that are going on.
I think one other thing I want to say that we won't cover until 1302, because it doesn't happen until 1924. Native Americans are not considered citizens of this country until 1924. That's after the slaves were freed and black men got the right to vote. Women, both black and white, got the right to vote in 1920. 1924 is when Native Americans got the right to vote. Because
And
they
that's,
became citizens.
I believe, the first state. That's not all the states, because it wasn't until, I believe, the 40s that the last state said, yes, Native Americans can vote.
So it's been a systemic, like bulldozing through culture and trying to get rid of these people. And I know when I first started studying years ago, I had on my rose-colored glasses and I'm thinking, maybe they were trying to help. But the more you read and the more you learn about why the U.S. government did this and how they did it, it's really genocide. And up until the 1950s, the U.S. government was also selling Native American children. And until 1987, Indian children who were put into the foster care system could be placed with any family, which I believe in having biracial families and bicultural families and all of that. Unfortunately, what was happening was they were put with white families who totally disregarded their culture.
And taken out of Native families because of things like you're poor. Not necessarily good reasons to remove a child and putting them with white families. They actually had to create a law in the 1970s, the Indian Child Welfare Removal Act, where they now say, if you take a child, the child needs to be put with an Indian family, okay? If at all possible, the child needs to be with Indian people. because for so many years the government would just take the children, put them in mission schools, put them in other families. They wanted to eradicate the Indians. Yes, forced assimilation. One of the elders that I interviewed, he was about 80, and this was about 10 years ago, probably 88. He told me that when the government came knocking on their door, his mother hid him in between the mattresses of a bed because she did not want them to take him. So she had to hide him because they were coming to take whatever kids were there.
So did you take it like that? Like, open the door, get your kid?
Yeah, you have to give up your kid or we'll take them.
And they would take these children out of their home, send them hundreds or thousands of miles away, not allow them to speak their language that they've grown up with,
Make them cut their hair.
which was
Hair is sacred.
traumatic event because you only cut your hair in Native societies in times of mourning, and wouldn't let them wear their clothing, wouldn't let them practice their culture. So then you have all of these children who are growing up like this, and if they go back to the reservation, they can't relate or talk to the elders because they don't speak the language anymore.
And why are they far away?
They put them far away because they found out that if they were
running
close,
away.
the kids would run back away and get home.
And they won't be allowed to talk to anyone in the class.
No. I had a speaker come who I went to high school with back in November, and his grandmother was in one of the boarding schools. She ran away 3 counties, 8 times from the boarding school. And this is not a time when, you could just hop on a bus and go.
You're on foot.
You're on foot and hiding behind trees and bushes. And it's very scary.
It was also illegal to practice our religious ceremonies until, I believe, 1976 with the Native American Religious Freedom Act. Because before then,
It's just like
they had made it illegal. Yeah, I know this whole, we have this religious freedom. No, Native Americans did not. No, it was illegal on the books. You can go to jail for it for practicing your Indian ceremonies until 1976. So yeah,
It's
lots of stuff that people don't realize because our history books, they minimize certain parts of our history down to like this, if anything.
And then they leave out the parts with it.
Yeah, it's totally, I mean, I don't even think they teach anything about Native Americans now other than Thanksgiving, which is a crock, and Pocahontas, which another not true story the way that whole thing happened. And Columbus, who was a pretty horrible person. There's actually a movement, to have Columbus Day changed, and some cities have done it to Indigenous Peoples Day.
I think our book only has a couple pages at the very beginning of the book
Yeah, on the first chapter talking
about
about
pre-colonization.
Yeah.
Like
And-
2 pages.
And in school, you don't learn anything of K through 12 other than the lies.
Yeah, they do, because they make the little headdress with
Yeah.
colors.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, but hopefully, if you want to join me for anthropology this summer, that would be great. We'll probably also try to offer a course next semester because I'm really pushing my boss. Because I want to, get some classes going over here. You don't have any. And anthropology, truly, it's just fascinating and fun and interesting. So I hope you'll have a very wonderful and safe time out there. Don't breathe the air. Just hold your breath. We'll all be good.
And bring your papers on Tuesday, and we'll peer review. You guys have a great weekend.
Did you say bring what on Tuesday?
Your paper, so we can peer review them.